I was completely taken aback when my husband Jonathan unexpectedly suggested that I should move back to my parents' house, even though they were already living with us. His sudden declaration left me stunned, yet he seemed to think he was being entirely rational. He bluntly asked, "Do you have a problem with that? Don't argue with me. I'm fine with divorcing you if you do." His recent behavior had been cold and distant, and I had my grievances too. I had considered the possibility of divorce myself, but it didn't seem right for him to force me out of our home. As I stood there in shock, I thought to myself, I'm the one paying $3,200 for our expenses. Does he even acknowledge that? He grew agitated and demanded, "Leave this house now. My parents won't feel comfortable with you here." I couldn't understand why I needed to leave, but I agreed, saying, "Okay, I'll take all my belongings with me." Once I consented, he appeared pleased and abruptly said, "Then do it," before walking away. Immediately, I contacted a store to sell my things. My name's Betty, and I live with Jonathan, who is 3 years my senior. We met through mutual friends, and what started as a casual meeting quickly evolved into spending an entire day together. Jonathan expressed his aspirations of becoming a voiceover artist, and I was captivated by his resonant voice. I've always had a fondness for soothing tones. It seemed he felt the same attraction, as we exchanged numbers and planned more outings. Before long, we found ourselves in a relationship almost effortlessly, without ever formally discussing it. I had just graduated from college when we met, and dating someone with a bit more life experience like Jonathan was thrilling. My friend Laura expressed concerns about our 3-year age difference, but I assured her it was no big deal. I genuinely liked Jonathan and felt his affection in return, so I wasn't worried. Eventually, Laura came around, trusting my judgment. Jonathan and I had been together for 2 years when he broached the subject of marriage. I had already spoken to my parents about him, including his age, and they were eager to meet him, harboring high hopes for our future. I often wondered when he would propose, and it turned out to be during one of his regular visits to my apartment. We were just lounging and enjoying each other's company. It wasn't the most romantic setting, but it was very much Jonathan's style, and I was fine with it. When he popped a question, I simply responded, "Sure, let's get married." Perhaps we both approached the whole thing with a laid-back attitude. After the proposal, we visited each other's parents. However, I didn't quite click with Jonathan's family. When we arrived at his parents' home, the place was decorated with items that seemed to mimic old-fashioned luxury, but felt insincere. His parents were dressed in costly attire and adorned with flashy jewelry, giving off an air of trying too hard to appear affluent. Our tastes and values appeared to be quite different, and I doubted we'd get along well. During the visit, Jonathan's mother even made a disparaging remark about my appearance, which was hurtful. I was taken aback by the behavior of the family of the man I intended to marry, but ultimately, I reminded myself that I was committing to Jonathan, not his family. As Jonathan and I prepared to get married, I reassured myself that it was okay if I didn't particularly enjoy his parents' company. I wouldn't have to spend much time with them, so I chose not to let it trouble me excessively. After our wedding, as we settled into our new condo, I noticed that Jonathan seemed preoccupied with something. One day, he suddenly asked, "Hey, who was that woman in the blue dress at our wedding?" Considering there were several guests in blue, I couldn't immediately pinpoint whom he meant. "Which woman in a blue dress?" I asked, trying to recall. "You know, the one who gave a speech as your best friend," he clarified. "Are you talking about Laura?" I replied as it clicked that Laura had worn a blue dress. "Yes, that's her," Jonathan said, his tone reflecting some unease. "What's wrong with Laura?" I inquired, puzzled by his concern. "Oh, it's not a big deal," he dismissed. "The other day, I thought I saw someone who looked like her when I was on my way to work. That reminded me she was your best friend who spoke at our wedding." I was a bit baffled by Jonathan's sudden curiosity about Laura and his flustered response. But before I could delve deeper, he laughed it off and retreated to his room. Shortly after this conversation, Laura called me, bubbling with excitement. "Listen, Betty, my boyfriend's coming back to Canada next year," she shared. Laura and her boyfriend had been dating since high school, having known each other since they were kids. He had moved away during middle school, but they maintained their bond through letters and eventually reconnected in high school, where he expressed his feelings for her. I've always enjoyed Laura's romantic tales. Despite her boyfriend working at an international branch for a few years, they managed to keep their relationship strong and connected. Well, do you think he might propose once he's back? She pondered excitedly. And then you guys will get married, I exclaimed, half teasing. Laura laughed and responded, Oh, Betty, you're always jumping to conclusions. Just make sure to invite me to the wedding. I promise I'll give another heartfelt speech. Of course, after the beautiful speech you gave at my wedding, I need you to do the same at yours. Just don't set the bar too high, I replied. We chuckled together as we sipped our tea, enjoying the ease and trust that flowed through our conversation. We had always been there for each other, ready to listen whenever one of us faced any issue. Around this time, I started noticing changes in Jonathan's routine. He began returning home increasingly late. Working late again today? I asked one evening. Yeah, you think I shouldn't work or something, he retorted. Even after our marriage, Jonathan clung to his dream of becoming a voiceover artist. He was dedicated, juggling part-time jobs to fund his voice artist classes. Unfortunately, all his earnings from these jobs were funneled straight into his training, leaving me to cover all our living expenses. This situation made it difficult for us to save any money together. As time passed, it became clear that Jonathan was not willing to compromise on his aspirations for the sake of our financial stability. My concern grew as he put in excessive hours at his part-time job, which only added to our financial strain. Hey, haven't you been working too much lately? They shouldn't be making you do so much overtime, even if it's just a part-time job, I mentioned one day. I told you I'm fine. More money is always better. Just keep your opinions to yourself, he snapped back. By then, Jonathan had become distant, no longer even using my name when we spoke. Since our marriage, Jonathan had begun to address me merely as you, and I had expected him to speak to me with kindness and more frequently. However, his words were often harsh. His once gentle voice had grown rough, and his drinking had increased significantly. At times, his voice even sounded hoarse, which was concerning given that voice artistry demanded a healthy voice. Despite this, he seemed disinterested in discussing his health and increasingly avoided conversations with me. Eventually, he started ignoring me altogether, even when we were in the same room. Amidst these challenging times, Laura called me. She mentioned she had something important to discuss. Given my concerns, I suggested we meet up, eager for a conversation with Laura. We decided to meet at a cafe and chose a booth with a private seating area. Laura selected our booth carefully, a spot where the counter and staff could easily see the entrance. You chose this booth specifically? I asked, noticing her cautious approach. Yes, she replied. I wanted a spot where the staff could see if there was a suspicious person outside our door. A suspicious person? Is that related to what you wanted to discuss? I asked, connecting the dots. Laura nodded, her expression tense. She explained that ever since she left her job about a month ago, she felt like someone was following her. Now, she even felt watched on her days off. The reason she picked a booth with a clear view was that she suspected the person stalking her might try to eavesdrop on our conversation. Did you talk to the police about it? I asked, concerned. I tried, but since there's no direct contact, they can't do much, she sighed. What about your boyfriend? Isn't he coming back in a month? I inquired, hoping she had some support. I thought I'd discuss it with him too, but I wanted to talk to you first. Someone close by, she explained. I understood her need for immediate support. Laura hadn't managed to get a clear view of her stalker, making the situation even more unnerving. She was too frightened to discern whether her stalker was a man or a woman. I decided to discreetly watch from a distance to try and identify who was following her. During this time, I was struggling with my troubled relationship with Jonathan and found it hard to open up about it. But as I kept an eye on the situation, I made a shocking discovery. The person shadowing Laura was none other than my husband, Jonathan. Jonathan often claimed he had to work late, but I noticed that after his shifts, he lingered near Laura's workplace and followed her as she left. I was stunned to realize that the person causing my best friend such fear was my own husband. Witnessing Jonathan tracking Laura with a creepy, unsettling grin completely changed my perception of the man I had married. The man I had fallen in love with now seemed like a stranger, and the love I thought would last forever turned cold. I knew I had to tell Laura the truth. I urged her to move immediately for her safety. With the help of her colleagues, she arranged for someone to drive her from the underground parking lot directly to her new residence. We took these precautions to ensure her safety as Laura made her escape. Jonathan's frustration intensified when he realized Laura had moved away. Eventually, his pent-up anger erupted. "My parents are going to live here, so you need to go back to your parents' house," he demanded abruptly one day. I was taken aback by his sudden and unreasonable demand. "If you have a problem with that, then I'm fine with divorcing you," he threatened, losing his temper. Though I had my grievances and had even considered divorce before, the reality of our deteriorating relationship hit me hard at that moment. I couldn't believe that Jonathan thought he could just kick me out of our home. After all, I was the one paying $3,200 for our monthly expenses. I wondered if he even remembered that as I gave him a skeptical look, but he just snapped, "Just leave already. My parents can't move in if you're still here." "Why do I have to leave?" "I don't understand at all," I replied, frustration building. Despite my confusion and frustration, I calmly said, "Okay, I'll take everything I bought with me." Seeing me agree, Jonathan impatiently told me to hurry up and walked away. I immediately contacted a local buyback service, and the next day, they arrived at our apartment. At first, Jonathan smirked, thinking I was simply packing to leave. However, his smirk faded into shock as he watched the workers evaluate all our furniture and appliances. Once they finished, except for the items in Jonathan's room, a staff member handed me a quote. "The total value is $299,000, they said. I quickly signed off. "Okay, sell it all." Suddenly, Jonathan snapped back to reality and grabbed my arm. "Why are you selling everything? My parents are going to live here. How can they if there's no furniture?" I shook off his grip and countered, "What do you mean? When we got married, you told me you were broke because you were paying for your acting classes. You asked me to handle the rent, furniture, and living expenses. I never knew you were that broke. I feel deceived. Remember the $3,200 I've been covering every month? From now on, you'll pay that, and with your parents moving in, I bet it'll be even more." Jonathan went pale, realizing the gravity of the situation. He attempted to regain his composure quickly. "You thought talking about money would make me cancel the divorce? Who do you think you are? I've already gotten close to a rich lady," he said, striking a pose. I remembered how Jonathan had been following Laura recently. If he considered that getting close, then his perceptions were deeply flawed. Laura, who came from a wealthy family, her grandfather, a businessman, and her father his successor, never flaunted her wealth. She looked just like me and our friends, not judged by her family's wealth. Yet it seemed Jonathan had learned of Laura's background and saw her as a better match, thinking perhaps that wealth made one person preferable over another. This notion infuriated me, but I knew Laura would never be interested in Jonathan. She had been with her high school boyfriend for years, and he was due back in the States soon with plans for them to marry. When I mentioned that Laura felt uneasy because someone had been stalking her daily, Jonathan was taken aback upon hearing that Laura found him creepy and that they weren't close. "I always walked Laura home," he protested. "You're lucky I didn't call the police," I replied sharply. "But I didn't know she had a boyfriend. He's been away. She picked me over someone she doesn't know." Jonathan tried to justify, misunderstanding their relationship. "They've been writing letters since they were kids and talk almost every day. And unlike you, who's only had part-time jobs, her boyfriend is successful. Even her dad likes him," I pointed out. Jonathan looked profoundly sad as I laid out the facts. It was clear that his delusions about forming a relationship with Laura were just that, delusions, and reality was setting in hard. As people arrived to take our belongings, he appeared somewhat relieved. "I guess you're all I've got now. You'll always support my dream of becoming a voiceover artist, won't you?" he asked, trying to seem unfazed. I responded with a steely gaze. "Sorry, I've already begun divorce proceedings. We should communicate through our lawyers from now on," I said coldly. Jonathan, perhaps thinking I still had feelings for him, clung to me. "Don't say that. Haven't we been getting along all this while?" "Getting along? Ever since you discovered my best friend Laura is wealthy, you've become distant and started spending time with her. Right after our wedding, I realized then that I had made a mistake," I continued. Jonathan broke down in tears. Despite being older, his childish weeping made him even less endearing to me. I could no longer bear to be near him. "Enough," I snapped. I've also informed your Uncle Anla about the divorce. You know he's a tough man. Well, he's decided you'll work for him, which means I can no longer support your voice artist dreams. You barely practice as it is. It might be time to accept reality and stay away from Laura, or I'll call the police. With those final words, I left, determined not to look back. For now, I would stay with my parents, though I considered moving closer to my workplace if I found a suitable place. Meanwhile, Jonathan ended up working for his uncle as predicted. His parents, who had planned to rely on him financially after his marriage to Laura, also moved in with him, all working for the uncle. It seemed that exploiting others was a family trait. I felt relieved to escape that toxic environment. Age wasn't the significant factor, but I vowed to be more cautious in choosing my next partner. On a happier note, after settling things with Jonathan, Laura invited me to her wedding. She introduced me to her long-term boyfriend, and I genuinely wished them happiness.